Hey, it's time for another collection connection here on Good Show Ponsonby, which is the game that my brother and I made up just as an excuse to talk about records. My brother's Plastic Eric, whose entries you can catch over on his channel, The Plastic Soundwave Cult. Every Monday, he'll present an album from his record collection, and every Thursday, I find something in my own collection that shares some facet or quirk with his choice. Then his next choice will have something in common with my pick, and so on and so forth. So what are we connecting today? Well, in Eric's last video, he showed off South of Reality, the 2019 album that is the second fruit born of the collaboration between Les Claypool and Sean Lennon, called, appropriately enough, the Claypool-Lennon Delirium. I forged a connection between that and the fifth album from the droll alternative rock band Cake, which is 2004's Pressure Chief. Instead of just telling you what the connection is, however, you are challenged to figure it out from the clues given and put your guess down in the comments. But first we will need to reveal the previous connection where Eric connected, and this is going to be a bit of a mouthful, the Claypool-Lennon Delirium's South of Reality to Ladies and Gentlemen, We Are Floating in Space from Spiritualized. And the connection is a Lennon family connection. Sean Ono is in the band with the Claypool Lennon. He's the Lennon in that Delirium. And Jason Pierce of Spiritualized remixed the Yoko Ono track Walking on Thin Ice for her 2007 remix album called Yes, I'm a Witch. So that was the connection. That was a pretty tough one. I don't know that it was telegraphed at all, so nobody guessed it. Trying to go for something a little more straight ahead today. And so with that, let's get on with the show. All right then, so Eric showed once again South of Reality, which he may be surprised to find out I thought was quite good. I found it pretty engaging. Even though it displayed sort of a lot of variations in style, those variations were still kind of within a tight area of the spectrum. This sort of psychedelic experimentalism, you know, a little bit kind of trippy stuff. Their first collaboration together was called Monolith of Phobos, which would have set off all kinds of red flags for me about not being something that I wanted to listen to. But even the sort of the proggy aspects of it, the longer tracks and stuff like that, they don't feel like pointless jams to me. And I'm interested in the things it calls up. The second track, which is I'm not going to be able to remember these song names. It's not too bad. Amethyst Realm was a good song, but was a name that was starting to raise a red flag a little bit. But mostly it was the two songs that in the prog style had a part one and a part two, and one of those that was the second track. I don't remember the name of it right off the top of my head, but the part of that, I think the first part of that was very Lennon, you know, sort of Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, kind of that specific Beatles era of psychedelia. Was pretty good. There was another track that made me think actually a lot of Avenged Sevenfold, which isn't a band that I actively listen to, but as a more recent, not recent, but as you get old, stuff from the last 20 years feels recent. I've liked some of their stuff. Avenged Sevenfold has sort of seemed like, to me, if Danny Elfman and Oingo Boingo were more openly sort of metal in their leanings, but has that kind of funhouse feel of Danny Elfman. And this track, I can't remember which one it is, that doesn't make me think of Oingo Boingo, but does make me think of Avenged Sevenfold, who make me think of Oingo Boingo, so make of that what you will. But yeah, the different gears I thought were interesting and good. I was relieved, I have to say, that it didn't sound like Primus. I'm not a Primus fan. The sound of Primus has never appealed to me. So even though it threw up kind of a ton of red flags, in the end, the experience, I listened to it a couple times. I thought it was pretty good. And as far as a connection, my first thought was to connect it to the Danny Harrison album that I have, which, not using this to connect it to that, I don't know how I'm going to connect that Danny Harrison album to anything. But Children of the Beatles felt a little bit too close to the Lennon connection that we had last time, and I felt for sure looking at the cover that I recognized the font, and I thought, do I have another album with that font? But eventually it hit me that that is like the Star Trek font, and I don't think I have any albums with the Star Trek font, but it did make me laugh that that was the font that they went with. So I tried to do that, and then the second of those sort of two-part suite songs was called like The Continuing Chronicles of Cricket. I don't think that was it, but like The Cricket Chronicles Part 2 or something like that, which referred back to another suite, I think, on the first album called The Cricket and the Genie. And I thought about trying to find something that brought back, you know, a story from a previous album. But I felt like we'd done Bowie very recently, so I didn't want to do like Ashes to Ashes with Major Tom coming back from Space Oddity, and I couldn't really think of anything else. And so after stumbling for a while of exactly what to connect it to, something that didn't feel too close, that was another problem with the Danny Harrison, is that the year felt a little too close. I was ultimately able to connect it to Pressure Chief from Cake. I think this is our first time talking about Cake. They're a band that I like quite a bit. They're one of those bands like the Smithereens or like AC/DC that can often feel like they kind of have one trick, like they have one song and they're constantly rewriting that one song. Like everything kind of a little bit sounds the same, but in all those cases I just mentioned, I like the song that they're writing variations of. You know, I love the Smithereens. You can't argue with, you know, AC/DC's sort of just basic, you know, four to the floor rock and roll. Similarly, Cake tends to feel a little bit the same, and so it is funny to me. I have 5 of their 6 studio albums. I don't have the first one, which is Motorcade of Generosity, but I have the other 5. And on one hand, they all kind of sound the same. There's not like a huge evolution, to my ears anyway, in sound. And yet, Fashion Nugget and particularly Prolonging the Magic are my favorite Cake albums. I feel like Prolonging the Magic especially, every track is great. And so I don't think that necessarily Cake is a great band, but I think that they're a fun band. They're an easy band to put on mixes. We love around here songs like Short Skirt, Long Jacket, Sheep Go to Heaven, The Distance, and a lot of the kind of Cake singles. But with that said, the last couple weren't ones that I super connected with. I bought them, so, you know, I have Pressure Chief, and the last one that I can't even think of the name of it off the top of my head, but I have them, but they never sunk deep. It is in part because of the sort of the 2000s thing where my collection started to get larger. I had a kid at that point, and you just don't have the time and focus to really ingest music. But after a few listens, Carbon Monoxide was the only song on here that caught my ear enough to throw it onto a compilation. And yet I still didn't like super love it. It felt like a weaker album to me. But listening to it, queuing it up here in the last few days, I've listened to it like 3 times. And like, I don't know what my problem was. It says on the sticker on the front here, that says including the hit No Phone. I don't remember No Phone being a hit. I don't remember anything really being a hit off of this album. But it is tried and true Cake music, you know. It's, I think it sort of revived it. That's a fun thing about this game. I think this album has moved up in my estimation of it since the last time I listened to it. A lot of these tracks, before I did my re-listen, I always kind of looked to see when the last time I listened to these things were on my iTunes library, the stats. I love to have my last played stat up there. And a lot of these hadn't been played since like 2011. So I really, probably, I think, is when that last Cake album came out. And I didn't like the last two, or I thought that I didn't like the last two, and then that's where I left it. But I enjoyed my playthrough. I thought Wheels was good. I thought Waiting was actually really good. Like, that's something I could see now putting on a mix. I think 2004 was deep in the era when music didn't have a ton of opportunity to get heard, and because of how I consume the music, basically through my computer, I was still concerned at that time about the memory space taken up by songs. And so when I would get something new, I'd give it 2 or 3 plays, cursory plays, with an eye for picking out 2 songs to pull off the album and put on iTunes. And it was a few years, it was about 2008, when I figured out that I was never going back to the CDs and listening to them. I was only really consuming the music through my computer. And at that point I bought an extra external drive in order to put all my music onto it so that it was all there and available, as opposed to just having cherry-picked a couple tracks out of there. And Carbon Monoxide may have been the only song that got picked off and put on back in 2004. So most of these songs had like 2 playbacks at most. The primary exception being another one that I rediscovered a few years back that I really, really like is The End of the Movie. It's a short little ditty. It is at track 9 here out of the 11 tracks, but to me it is very much a closing track, and so I put it at the end of one of my mixes. I like the sudden end of it. I like the pulled back nature of it. I like that it's kind of dark but delivered in the same sort of sardonic, I don't care that much kind of voice that John McCrae always does, he being the lead singer. I tried to commit somebody, DeFiore and John McCrae are the only 2 people who are like in the band from the beginning and are still in the band today. It's interesting to me that they've released just these 6 studio albums, but they have continued to perform. I think they did go away for a while, but they're back. They do shows, but apparently they're not putting together any new music, which strikes me as odd. I don't know if a band is self-aware enough to say, hey man, we're just not inspired to write any new music, or nobody wants to hear the new music, they just want to hear the greatest hits, so why don't we just play the greatest hits and not even bother making new music? The cost of making an album is not going to be made up. We're better off just playing shows and playing the songs that people know. I'm not sure what kind of thought and logistic consideration goes into that, but the fact that they continue to tour and play shows but haven't put out a new record in 13 years now is interesting to me. They were already on their 4th drummer by the time of this album, and they'd been through a few bassists as well, although one, not original bassist, I believe, but a long-time bassist came back. It's either the bassist or the drummer, I forget. Someone who wasn't there when they were founded in 91, but was there from like 94 to 2001, and then came back later, but I forget. I try and cram too much information in my head, and bits of it invariably fall away as I try to recount it here. But yeah, surprisingly strong. I'm glad that I dug a little bit for a connection, and I don't think the connection is, it's much more straightforward than the last couple ones have been. I know at least our stalwart guesser Murdoch has noted that mine have been a little more oblique in the last couple of weeks, just trying to make it fun. But this is a pretty straightforward connection that you should be able to find with, I think, minimal research. Just a fact that both albums, it is specific to these albums, that these 2 have in common. The Cake album, this one, Pressure Chief, can never remember that name, and South of Reality from the Claypool Lennon Delirium. And so with that, if you have a guess, leave it down in the comments. Anyone guesses right, first one will get shouted out in the next video, which will be Eric's video on Monday, where he finds a connection to cake. And with that, that's all I got. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye. Good show, Ponsonby.